direct as well as act. I had two interrelated questions. How do you choose to cast yourself, and how do you then judge a performance and decide how to approach it? And
well, I know, like in a lot of cases, like I know when I was directing, you don't choose to cast yourself; they choose you to cast yourself because sometimes actors are fake and they don't show up. You're stuck having to play a character that somebody can't come in all of a sudden, or Justin, the production will come in and say, "How about you play this tertiary character," which means not lead, not secondary, but this character that comes in once every 3 episodes, so that in case somebody doesn't show up or somebody flakes out, the booth isn't empty because they lose time.
Yeah, I know for me, whenever I was directing, my producer was Colleen Blinkenbeard, and she would always have to make the final say on any of the casting decisions that I made, and she was actually usually the one that casted me and stuff. And made me direct.
Did you guys
I think, it's different. It varies all the time because a lot of times the voice acting community is very small, especially in Texas with Funimation, so we all know each other and we're kind of this big family. Well, I mean, in regards to what they're...
In Dallas.
In Dallas is what I mean, because most of these, we're Dallasites here. And so, my favorite... Well, most of us, yes. But anyway, I live there too. And so, when I was walking down the hall one day, Sabat pulled me aside in the Kumite area of Funimation, which is this open area where we sometimes fight to the death. And we were about to do D. Grey Man, and I had no idea what this show was about. And so he wanted to ask me two things. You remember this conversation?
no.
I know he wouldn't, that's why I'm telling it. And so we're walking down the hall, and he said, I think first was like, to be Alan in the show. And for those of you, that's the dude in the show, the Grey Man. We never figure out why he's called D. Grey Man, except he has gray hair. And then after that, right after that, I was like, oh man, that would be awesome. That'd be great. I'd love to do it. Fantastic. And then he says, also direct it. And so that was kind of like a, that's how that happened. Because a lot of times I think people think it's a big mystical oracle thing where like the witch puts the little chicken bones in the water and then it ripples and creates a future and then we find out who's directing the show. It's as simple as that sometimes. And then we fought to the death and it was a tie, and so we continued on with that agreement.
I don't have a lot of experience in this area of casting myself, but I have a few insights. First of all, when you're directing a show, you will spend hours and hours and hours before any of the actors come in. And those hours are spent learning the show, those hours are spent watching all the episodes, it's spent scheduling everybody, getting your crew together and getting all the materials and stuff like that. And you become intimately familiar with the material. You will be, most likely at Funimation, the only person who has seen that show from beginning to end. And you will be the very first fan of that show. And so, say for instance, there's a character in it that's got a deep voice that sounds just like all the other voices that I play in that show. I want to play it, and I'm directing it, and I know I'm going to be spending all of my time and effort doing it. I know that I'm at least going to show up for my session, and I don't pay myself to do it, I just do it. So if you're if you're appropriate for the role, and most directors know they are, because all the directors who've directed at Funimation, particularly, a majority of them, are usually pretty talented actors to begin with. I don't think it's a problem casting yourself. I know it kind of hurts some people's feelings, but at this point, I like the show more than they do. They just want to get a role, so that's fine. And as for how do you judge yourself, anyone can tell you that when you're by yourself, directing yourself, you are harder on yourself than you are on anybody else. I will do tons and tons of takes because I am conscious of the fact that if people know that I cast myself in that role, I better darn well do a good job doing it. So you're actually kind of getting a more invested actor when you have a director.
Yeah, I agree. You're harder on yourself because I've been with me for years. I've seen myself sad, happy, naked, angry. I can tell myself anything. And so when I'm in the booth, I'll yell at myself sometimes. We'll get into a fight sometimes.
I've seen the opposite. I've seen someone cast themselves in a role they're not proper for because they think they're the right person. One of the studios I work for actually they won't let an actor cast himself in a lead role. And in the few cases that it's happened, it's because there was no one else to do that, because they don't like not having a point of reference for the, like, a director. They don't like a director not having a director, or an actor not having a director.
Yeah, typically you'd be kind of a jerk if you were the director and you cast yourself as the lead in it. That would be kind of a huge, not so cool move. So we have one more question. Does anyone else have a question? Yes. And by the way, the people on this table here, are you guys more like? Are you guys
They're actually
evaluating
judging
us?
us, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are you a panel of judges? Are you going to hold up a 10?
They're the sponsors, so we have to
Make them happy.
Oh, actually,
Yeah.
there's a phone question we haven't written. Sorry. Someone, a volunteer
And if you guys want to be comfortable, you can even sit down there if you feel. Yeah, you guys are welcome to sit too. It's cool. Sorry. It's all important.
Hey guys, well, I'm an aspiring voice actor myself, and let me just say that it is, I can't even believe that you are here in front of me right now. It's, I'm sort of freaking out. You got like Vegeta, Yoshihara, Death Kitty, you sitting here, like, it's nuts. But what I was wondering is, since, I mean, it's obviously getting into the business takes a lot of work. Where
How's it going? Good. I'm just videotaping right now.
Seeds of this amazingness that I see.
I'm videotaping this, so.
I can contain myself.
I seen you before.
Why don't you start? Rena wanted to answer that question before. You start.
Okay. See her again. I'll talk to you later, okay?
I'm
Yeah.
Now I'm nervous. So I started, well, okay, so when I was 16 years old, I took a tour of Funimation Studios, and Chris Sabat was in the booth. And thinking, I can do that. And so whenever I graduated high school, I ended up going to a community college that was just a couple miles from the studio, and I walked into the studio and I asked how to audition, and they put me on a waiting list, and I waited a couple months, and then I got into audition, and then I started doing a lot of bit parts. My first show to audition for was Case Closed.
Woo! Woo!
And I obviously didn't get cast.
Oh.
Well, I mean, I'm in it now, but whatever. I did a lot of like bit parts and stuff, and I did bit parts for a really long time, unlike these guys. I actually had to work my way up the ladder. So I did bit parts for a really long time because I sucked. Not you guys.
You know what? Lando Calrissian didn't have to do very much to get the Millennium Falcon. Luke had to get his hand chopped off.
Good when I first started, so I actually had to work my way into ever getting cast in anything. And so somehow they kept calling me to do bit parts for like 2 years. And then I eventually got cast as Nina Tucker in Full Metal Alchemist. And then that was my first featured role. And then I kept getting cast more and more and more. And Aho and Beck was actually my first lead that I ever got. Yeah. And and then from there I started directing, and then.
But you have a background in.
Yeah, I have a background in theater, and I have my degree in music. So I was in music school all the while I was
Littering is not illegal in Illinois, by the way. I read that somewhere.
Are you serious?
I don't know. It's just in Texas.
But yeah, so whenever I started, it was much easier to just call up and ask for an audition because it was a little bit newer of a company. Now, if you do that, I think it's like a 2-year waiting list if you don't have an agent or if you don't know somebody. So I don't know how helpful my story is.
Yeah, everybody's story is very different too.
What about you? You're new to this con.
I do think, Rena, your story is closer to what the story it would be, like what it would be like now. Because
Having to work your way up.
Greg's been doing this longer, and and Monica, I guess, have been doing this longer than any of us on this table. And
No, you were doing it the same
I
amount
don't
of
know.
time. We're just in different places.
'Cause I'd already heard of you guys when we first started, or either that, it took me a long time to hear you guys because we didn't, at Funimation, there was other people even working in anime because we weren't paying attention to anything except for Dragon Ball. So, so there you go. You're welcome. Oh, Dragon Ball Z.
Woo! Woo!
Over 9,000. Yes, got it all done.
Okay, Todd, you go.
I'll tell you what's nuts, this currency exchange rate. Oh! So I don't know why I went there. That's not very dark. For me, it was a normal audition. It wasn't dramatic at all. It was just a normal audition set up to the agency. And then I went up there, and they didn't hate it. And they're like, you know what? We need a male feminine voice. Who can we get? Someone with feminine hands, yes. Someone who's made fun of as a child for their voice, yes. Someone who spent many years in their room while their friends were out on dates practicing voices, yes. Get me Habercorn! And so I did a little itty bitty blink and you'll miss it role in Peach Girl. And then I did Black Cat, and then I got my first lead, which was Suzuka. And then it kind of continued on from there. And it was kind of a gamble for me because at the time I was teaching, I have a background in theater as well, and I was teaching theater right out of college because I was doing films and things like that, but then also teaching it. And I had to make a decision. It came to the point where it's like, do I keep going down this road of teaching, or do I go down this road of voice acting and then try it and see what happens? And I was a bad teacher, even though I won Teacher of the Year. The principal who didn't like me had to read that over the loudspeaker anyway. I was a bad teacher because I was working at the same time as pretty much a full-time actor doing on-camera stuff. And so I would show up at school very tired, exhausted, and there was one time, I remember this one time where these kids were doing, my children's, were doing a presentation, and I go, now, don't bore me to sleep. Okay, you got to do a good job. Remember everything that I've taught you. Remember everything. And so they begin to do their performance, and they look over, and I'm like this.
Oh!
And I wake up, and I go, I told you don't bore me.
Oh!
And so I realized it was probably time to get out of the teaching profession. But I think what did it for me, and I guess it's kind of coming from the same place that you guys have this dream to want to do voice acting and stuff. I would say temper it with research and experience. Don't just think because you have a nugget of a dream it's going to work out like it does in the made-for-TV movies, because that stuff is staged. You can do it, but that's one of the tools. The desire to want to do it is just one of the many tools you need to get your foot in the door. And so you just got to keep in mind and remember that. Like all these people up here are very good business-minded folks, and they're very good with people. They have great people skills. They're very talented. They have good mic technique, things like that. But they're very. I think what happens is actors get kind of a rep for being like they just kind of waltz in and they Charlie Sheen their way into something, and they throw money around.
Oh.
No, you have to, as an actor, you have to be some of the most responsible, some of the most on-time people, some of the most doing your due diligence. I mean, Brina she's forgotten so much knowledge and talent that I will never have. And so you got to remember that kind of stuff. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about your path and your journey. But yeah, mine was just kind of going up for an audition, and they didn't kick me out, and they kept me around. So yeah.
But on the same lines of what you just said about being responsible and showing up on time and everything, I think the reason that I kept getting called back to do bit parts and Wallace sessions and everything was because every time they called me, I didn't care what I was doing or anything. I mean, I skipped class so many times because, don't skip class, but because I wanted them to know that I was always available to them. And I lived an hour away from the studio by the time I started getting a lot of bit parts and everything, because I transferred colleges. But anyway, so I would drive an hour to go work for an hour and get paid like $30, and then,
spend that in gas to get home.
Yes, exactly.
Now,
Exactly.
having said that also, being responsible, being on time, I will say without a doubt, for a fact, every one of us up here has been late to a session multiple times. But don't do that. Be on time.
But I didn't when I started out.
Yeah.
That's for darn sure.
That's right.
You cannot, you have to be, when you're just a little runt, you have to show okay, I may not be as amazing as Monica Rial, but I'll be here on time.
I think has never been late to a session, that would be Lucy Christian.
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
think Lucy's late for anything,
No.
ever. She's usually an hour early.
No. She was late one time when she was delivering her first. I was sitting there watching the clock.
Oh, well,
I don't see a doctor's note.
Oh, she was only like 3 minutes late though. So.
Yeah, she had the epidural still hanging out of her back. And it was
she was recording up until the very last minute on their first baby.
the baby remembers the show she was doing.
Yeah.
So that's how long she recorded.
I'll keep mine short. I grew up on stage. My brother worked with Monica when Monica was in junior high school and high school. And I was a huge anime fan, but I didn't watch anything in English. I was a big fan, but I didn't listen to the dub because, in all fairness, the dubs in the 80s were awful. And so that wasn't interesting to me. Well, then Monica and another actor that I used to work with on stage, Chris Patton, were doing a lot of work in anime, and so I started listening to this stuff they were doing, and it was really good. It wasn't like the old bad big hair anime. And so they were casting a show called Spriggan, and they were looking for a guy they had a 9-year-old boy as the main villain, and they couldn't find, and you can't, for the most part, you can't hire children because there's a certain number of hours you can work children and whatnot. And Monica and Chris both kept saying, "Oh my God, call my friend. He's in his 30s and he sounds like he's 12. Just call him." So my audition was my voicemail at the law firm I worked for. The first, that's all. Stephen Foster called my voicemail, and I'm like, "Hi, you reached the desk of Greg Ayers of Dogs is Vincent and Elkin. It's all right." And like, that was my audition. And so the next morning when I was listening to my voicemail, I was hearing like, "My laptop doesn't work. I need a PowerPoint presentation help." And then I get this one that's like, "Oh my God, you sound like a little child." And I was like,
And then you sued him.
Stephen Foster, and I like, much like you, I auditioned for a year and never got in anything. And I auditioned for all these shows, well, in Houston, yeah. I auditioned for all these shows that I wanted to work on, like Orphan and Generator Gall, and things that were really cool shows. And then my first role I shared with Claudia Black, the hot Australian chick from Farscape. I basically played this super yaoi little boy, a theme that would follow me. When this little boy is trying to convince the main character, who's a girl playing boy, to kill this angel when she doesn't, this angel robot, when she doesn't, he kisses the little boy and turns into this giant big-breasted female robot, which is Claudia Black. And I was just okay doing it once, but then I started, right after that, I auditioned for a show that I didn't know. It was called Paradise Raiders at the time, but the names of the characters were like Son Goku, Shai Gojo, Chohakai, and Sanzo, and I was looking at the director going, "Is this Sayuki? Is this Sayuki that we're auditioning for?" He was like, "Yeah, fanboy, get in the booth." So I had a little bit of knowledge, which helped, but much like you, I got a little role, and I did a lot of little roles while still doing. I did a lot of like bits and leads at the same time. And then a few years later, Monica and who was it? It was you and me and Vic and Chris were the ones that first started going up to Dallas. And we started working in Dallas. So you talk about driving up for a short session. We have I'm the only one now that still has to make the drive to Dallas, but it's 5 hours to get to Dallas or now 6 from where I live. So talk about waking up at 4 in the morning to make a 10 o'clock session. Whoa. But you do it, it's work. But yeah, I think most of us have a background in performance of some sort.
I was
Sing Shakespeare!
with Mr. Jason Douglas, who is fantastic in the voice of God and Il Palazzo and many other things. He's not really God. We were doing a Shakespeare show together, and he kept talking about this animation that he was voicing. He was like, "You really should do it because you sound like a child." Thanks, Jason. So I called, and this was way back in 1990. So I called, and they just happened to be having auditions that weekend, which is not the case anymore. And then I showed up and auditioned, and then I waited for like 2 months, and I got called in to do Walla for Martian successor Nadeshko. So
For those of you who are unaware, WALA is an acronym which means with all actors.
it's basically the people in the background going, "Go home, Jovians, go home." So I did that, and then after that I was cast in Dosaraki and Generator Gall, and I keep thinking that at some point they're going to stop casting me, but they haven't! Whether you like it or not, you're stuck with
I know, because you're just so difficult to work with, and everyone just complains.
Oh my God, I second that emotion.
My story is a lot simpler, so I'll keep it really short. I have a really super deep voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically the same. Same thing as the last two stories, except that I didn't sound like I was 13, I sounded like I was 50.
Oh.
And that's it. I mean, to explain kind of where I came from, it was really a lot of right place at the right time type of moments. I just happened to be friends with somebody who worked for this company that had 3 employees at it, and this girl spent all of her time animating the naughty parts out of this show called Dragon Ball, so that it can go on Saturday morning cartoons at 5 o'clock in the morning. This was the original Dragon Ball series, and as it turns out, Funimation needed some people. She contacted me. I started actually in radio. I was a DJ for a long time. I actually was a DJ out in Houston for a long time and in Galveston. And yeah, I grew up in Houston and I lived in Galveston. I worked
That's
for.
where I live. That's the island I live on. Yeah.
I worked for Rock 101 KLOL, and I had to do overnight shifts there. And the point of working at that radio station, they would always tell you, "Yo, man, just sound a little bit more like you're asleep. Like, just sound as tired as you possibly can," which wasn't really hard for between midnight and 6 o'clock in the morning. But every time I'd have to do an air check, which is where you record yourself on the radio and then you give it to your production director and they review it. They go, "Yeah, man, can you just make it just a little bit more relaxed, actually?" And then it's just like, finally, it was just Rock 101 KLOL. I listened to Rock all night. I was smashing pumpkins after the weather. And the thing is, that was the last good, appropriate radio station I worked for, because unfortunately, my voice is so sassy sounding and so handsome sounding. You don't have a choice when you're in radio as to what station you're going to work for. Like, everyone wants to work at a pop station, they want to work at a rock station, they want to work somewhere. No, Christopher R. Sabat had to work at Mix, which is just like, coming up next, Huey Lewis in the news, followed by Whitney Houston. And so I realized that radio wasn't the thing I wanted to do, so I went to community college like Brina did. I went to a school in Alvin called Alvin Community College. Yep, and I started studying radio and television there, and then blah, blah, blah. It's a really long story, but the truth is, you never know how you're going to get into this business. The only thing you guys can do now is just kind of keep your eyes open. You can do any of the stuff that we do right now. If you want to do it, you can get a computer. You have a friend that can help you figure out how to dub this stuff. Yeah, there's all sorts of ways you can become internet famous in 30 seconds. So like, practice it, because the more practice you have when you finally do meet that one person, and the more confident you are when you go in, the better off you'll be. And I think someone was touching on this earlier. It's like, when you finally do get that audition, when you do get that shot, remember that everything you say in the studio, everything you do is an audition for your next role. And so if you act like a jerk when you're there, if you're really annoying,
Never
you're like,
entitled.
yeah, or act like you know more than other people, like you're just not going to work. So you have to be extremely humble, extremely talented, and as extremely on time as you possibly can be.
If Tony Stark were not rich, he's a real jerk most of the time. He would not get cast in another show.
No, he's been begging for roles, and
the Avengers is not as glamorous as they make it seem in 2.5 hours.
Do you want to add something real quick, just because there are several people in here that want or are interested in pursuing a career in acting, voice acting? Don't think that buying someone's book or taking just a workshop is going to be your foot into the industry. There are a lot of really scummy actors out there right now that are not working as much as they used to. They're trying to figure out a way to pay the bills. There are a lot of good actors that do workshops. My friend Richard Horowitz does workshops, but just because you do, isn't he awesome? He's so hysterical, and he really sounds like that in real life. He's like, "I will kill you." I was like, "Oh my God, it's him." But he does a great workshop, but you take his workshop not because, oh, I studied under Zim and I can drop that name. You study under that person to learn what that person brings to the table. And then if you take Bob Bergen's workshop, who's the voice of Porky Pig, you find out where he's coming from. And there are lots of people that do voice acting workshops, but none of them are a foot into the industry. And if anybody tries to tell you they can sell you a book on how to get into the industry, they're lying to you. There's not a formula for it. There's just people taking advantage of you.
It is important to always study, though.
Yeah, study.
Like, studying is important.
I want to take Horowitz' class. It sounds fun. He was telling me about it. Yeah.
But by studying, they don't necessarily are talking about just classes. And I've said this at other panels, and I'm sorry we're going on, but this is kind of the whole point of this whole panel. The thing about working in the industry, we've said multiple times, like, oh, there's a waiting list for 2 years unless you know somebody, or if you happen to know someone, you can get in faster. The way you get to know people is to work in the industry, but you don't have to necessarily, if you want to be a voice actor, it's like playing darts. If you always try and hit the bullseye of the dartboard, you're gonna fail. If you just try and hit anywhere, as many places as possible around the dartboard, you're more likely to hit a bullseye at some point. So, you know, there's so many skills and so many like related industries. Get involved in film and in theater and all the places where you can learn acting and learning how to
also
produce.
How if you want to make money, you're not going to be able to pay your rent by only doing voice acting.
Be as diverse as you can.
I mean, none of us only voice act. We all do lots of different things.
Don't do just don't pigeonhole yourself.
Yeah.
That's like saying, I only want to do voiceover for red Toyota commercials. I mean, that's how limiting that is. If you're only willing to do voice acting for anime, who knows, you may have great comedic timing, and you may be the next Rob Mungle, or you may be a gifted singer, and you find those things out when you're taking and training and doing stage and film and stuff like that.
Yeah, because when you get that opportunity, when you finally do get your foot in the door, if you haven't been studying and you haven't been working out those muscles, then you're gonna fail. Like when you do get your foot in the door, that's not the trick. Getting your foot in the door is not the trick. It's being prepared once you get there.
And also, you may try out these different aspects of voice acting and find that you don't want to do that at all. Maybe you want to be an engineer. Maybe you want to be an animator.
Maybe you want to be an editor, yeah.
Yeah, and if you have my same vocal range, maybe you don't want to do voice acting ever, and you want to do something else. Maybe you want to go start a sewing company somewhere. Yeah.
We waited long enough.
Yes, I'm sorry, no more questions.
Are you really sure about that?
Alright, sorry.
Alright. In your opinion, what would be the difficult range between someone that's auditions for a role but did not do any research to a series compared to someone who auditions for a role that did research to a series?
How attractive are they?
The show that Monica and I just finished, Edmund Wonderland, actually, that was a turnoff for the director. There was a person that came in and said, oh yeah, I downloaded this whole thing and watched the whole show, and to him, that was a huge slap in the face. He's like, well, I can't surprise you with anything. A little bit of research on this show might be helpful, but it's also important that you're bringing an acting job to the table and you're not just impersonating what was there before. I like to go in cold. I like to not know as much as I can so I can give it a unique approach. But I did just hear Joel go off on this kid that said he downloaded all of Dead Man Wonderland and watched it. So.
Well, for me, see, I think there's a 50-50. Because there are some times, like when you're doing theater, you need to know that whole show. You need to know. And with anime, well, I mean, with the show Rin, I don't know if you guys saw Rin. Had I known how that show ended, it would have changed how I did the entire character. I wish I had known that whole show. Because at the end is a really big surprise reveal that doesn't help me if I don't know it. Even though I'm acting and you want to be surprised and stuff, well, that's my job. My job is to make you think it's the first time I've done that and said that. That's my job. It's not my job to be surprised with you. So
well, but that's the director. Director should let you know if there's something you should know ahead of time. The director should let you know.
I wish I had known that, because when I found out the secret at the end, and I don't want to spoil it. Well, if you haven't seen Ren, you're probably. I mean, if you haven't seen Kim, yeah. So there's something that happens where there's a big reveal for my character. Like, I think I'm a man, and then I discover I'm also a woman at the same time. And I wish
that was a totally different discovery. Like,
yeah. I want to thank you, Chris, for helping me get through the counseling.
I helped you get right through it.
Yeah. Chris is my rock. But had I known that, when I did the show, it would have changed my whole approach to how I did the character. And so a lot of times, the exchange for not knowing the show and going in cold is that you have a director, kind of like Chris was talking about, that knows the show better than anybody. And they can guide you down the path. They can be your Yoda and your Obi-Wan as you go through Dagobah. And your weapons, you would not need them. And so when you're going through, you're figuring it out, you know where to go because the director leads you there.
Now, I have a better suggestion though. I mean, on top of all that, or another suggestion. You can watch the whole show. In fact, feel free, watch the whole show. Just don't tell anybody that you did.
That's exactly.
That you would be really well, the smartest move would be to watch the whole show if you have access to it. I mean, if you could, damn, I wish I could have the time or the energy to watch all the shows before I audition. If you have that time, go for it, do it. Just don't tell the director until maybe you've already got the role and you're about halfway through it.
I've seen all of TJ Hooker. Do I tell anyone? No. I don't say a word about it.
Well, you're just mad you didn't get a role on TJ.
Yeah. I know.
But yeah, I think the point is, though, don't come in acting like you know everything about the show, because that makes the director feel like you're not directable. The director needs to feel like they can mold you into what they want that character to be. So if you come in with any kind of arrogance or entitlement, once again, attitudes that should never be in you when you're doing an audition. As long as you come in with humility and you just want to do the work and do whatever the director is trying to get you to do, then that's what will get you hired, regardless of whether or not you've seen it. Just don't come in and brag about how you know everything about the show.
Brag about how many push-ups maybe you can do.
If you watch the whole show, there's a good chance your audition will probably be pretty good. So I'd be pretty confident in knowing that. I wouldn't brag about it just yet. At least until you get the role, then you go, in your face, I know this show.
I watched the whole show! And then they hit the trapdoor and you fall into a pit.
Again, only happens to Todd.
But I built up an immunity to all forms of venom. So.
Yes, sir.
First of all, I'd like to say I feel incredibly privileged to be talking to you all this afternoon. And I really hope I don't trip over my own tongue during my questions, so I'm just going to carry on if I don't screw up. I come from a background in theater myself, and I'm going to college in the fall for broadcasting, hoping to get into radio. But for a long time, my dream, of course, has been to voice act. That's why I'm here. A lot of my friends have told me my voice is very malleable. I don't know why. And so I was just wondering, I do want to work in radio for a few years if I can, but I was just wondering what tips you might be able to give us for the transition period from one job into voice acting.
Into like anime specifically, or?
Not necessarily, just sort of the job in general.
Oh.
My suggestion would be don't ever worry about a transition. Try and do them both. Don't try and transition to one to the other. Make it so that like you're doing both things, and then all of a sudden you're doing so much anime that you're like, oh, screw this, I don't want to do any more radio anymore. I don't think there's much of a transition. There are differences between the two because there are a lot of people who work in radio who absolutely cannot be voice actors, and vice versa. But there's one dude, he was the narrator for Dragon Ball. He's one of the best voices of all time. Dragon Ball Z Kai, his name is Doc Morgan. He's got the deepest voice you've ever heard. He's the voice of Ford trucks, he's the voice of Six Flags. Like, he does everything. Man, and he's one of these amazing, huge voice dudes. You can record him on any microphone anywhere, and then 10 years later, you can get a pickup on that same line and he will sound identical. It's just amazing. But I made the mistake one time of, like, right before a session, I was like, hey man, why don't you do a bit part? Why don't you just one little role? And it just blew his mind. He was just like, oh, and then we tried it, and then his session was terrible because I completely shot him down. Because acting is not something you need to be an announcer. An announcer is a whole different set of skills there. But if you can keep up your acting and your voiceover and your voice, I mean, that's a great skill set.
Yeah, because the radio stuff will give you the mic technique and learning all of that and what you actually sound like, what your voice sounds like, and then keeping up the theater will help, keep your acting skills fresh and everything.
I would suggest you listen to the stuff you do broadcast-wise. I used to, I had this weird little punk rock radio show on KPFT in Houston when I was a kid, and I just recently went back and listened to tapes of that show. I wish I would have known what I sounded like then. Chewing gum on the microphone. I mean, like, it was a little punk rock show, but like hearing yourself, and that's one of the things, the advantage that we get working with a mic is we constantly hear the playback of our own voice. If you're doing broadcast, regularly record yourself and listen to yourself and see, you know, how it sounds to you. Let other people hear it with them.
Yeah, and keep up with that. I mean, like doing theater is great. It'll keep you hungry because it doesn't pay that well.
None of these jobs individually pay
Yeah.
very well. That's why you have to have
So
all
you
of
have to do
them.
all of them.
Yeah.
Also keep in mind too that in radio, things are packaged in 15, 30, 60, and 2-minute sections, right? And you're always trying to hit the mark or hit the post, and there's always about like trying to fit as many clear words into a small space at one time. Whereas, and that's one of the things I had to deal with a lot when I was learning to act. And literally, I had learned to act while I was working on Dragon Ball by watching really awesome people do it. It's like giving yourself space to breathe and knowing kind of where to take those comfortable breaths, and knowing how to act without having to even project that much. Some of the best actors right now, the ones who are getting cast the most, are the ones that if there was a microphone, you wouldn't be able to hear him from here to there. Like Troy Baker is a good example. That guy has the quietest voice on microphone, but everyone loves that right now. It's a big deal. So, blah blah, lots of information.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Hi. I just want to know what year did you guys start doing voice acting?
1974.
Where did you start?
I started in 1998.
Oh, then you started before I
I
did.
mean, if that's anime, then 1998 is when we.
You were.
But we really weren't doing that good of a job back then. So it's not fair to say I wasn't even good at it until like 1992.
I was 1999.
Oh wow. I was 2001.
Okay.
2003.
Okay.
06.
Wow.
That's cool.
We're like what was it? It was like the all crow hanging star.
I'm sorry, it was 2000. 2001 is when I quit, or I left my job and did this full time. But I started in 2000. That's right.
Okay. Well,
How many
thank you.
people were born in 2000? Anybody?
Oh, then you're 12.
Right there. Bam. Bam. Awesome.
I've had several people now. That's when the thing at concert makes me feel old. I'm like, I started in 1999. And there's like 3 kids. That's when I was born.
That's also when The Matrix came out.
If people would stop being born, we wouldn't feel so old.
Well, thank you. You guys are my favorites.
Oh,
Thank you.
Sweet.
Quickly, before I ask my question, can I just say that, Todd, you remind me a lot of Carlos from YTV.
We don't get YTV. Can someone give us an example? Can someone pull something up on this?
It's a Canada thing.
Oh, okay, cool. I thought I had just insulted the entirety of
I want to become a voice actor, as many people here do, and education-wise, what's the best thing to do?
Well, I mean, again, it's about the perspective of the education.